Welcome back to Shocking Stories, where we uncover the most chilling true crime cases that will make you think twice about the history hiding within the walls of your own home. I'm your host, and today we're heading to the quiet town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, where a young couple's dream of homeownership became a nightmare that would reopen one of the state's most infamous cold case investigations. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will make you question every old house you've ever lived in and wonder what secrets might be hidden just inches away from where you sleep each night. This is the story of Jake and Emma Carter, newlyweds who thought they had found the perfect starter home in Millbrook's historic district. But when they began renovating their 1950s colonial, they discovered that their house had been keeping a deadly secret for over 3 decades. A secret that would connect them to victims they had never heard of and a killer who had disappeared without a trace in 1994. Picture this. It's a crisp October morning in 2024, and 28-year-old Jake Carter is standing in what was supposed to become his home office, hammer in hand, staring at a wall that doesn't make sense. Jake, a software engineer with an eye for detail, had been measuring the room when he realized that something was wrong with the dimensions. The room was supposed to be 12 feet wide according to the original blueprints. Jake later told investigators, his voice still shaky from the discovery that would change his life forever. But when I measured it myself, it was only 9 feet. There were 3 feet missing somewhere, and I couldn't figure out where they had gone. Jake and Emma had purchased the house at 1247 Maple Street 6 months earlier from the estate of Margaret Hoffman, an elderly widow who had lived there alone for 15 years after her husband's death. The house had excellent bones, original hardwood floors, and the kind of character that young couples dream about when they imagine their first home together. "We fell in love with the house the moment we saw it," Emma Carter, a 26-year-old elementary school teacher, recalled during her interview with Pennsylvania State Police. "It had this warm, welcoming feeling, and Margaret had kept it in beautiful condition. We never imagined that someone before her had used it for such horrible purposes." The Carters had been living in the house for 3 months when they decided to convert the back bedroom into a home office for Jake's remote work setup. The room had always felt smaller than it should be, but they had attributed that to the house's vintage layout and post-war construction quirks. But Jake's engineering background made him naturally curious about structural details, and the missing 3 feet bothered him enough that he decided to investigate. Using a stud finder and measuring tape, he began examining the walls to understand how the room had been configured. "That's when I found the anomaly," Jake explained to Detective Sarah Martinez of the Pennsylvania State Police, who would lead the investigation that followed. "The wall that separated the office from the hallway was much thicker than it should have been. A normal interior wall is about 6 inches thick, but this one was over 3 feet thick. Something was hidden inside that wall." Jake's discovery came at 10:47 a.m. on October 15, 2024, when his stud finder detected a void behind what appeared to be a solid wall. The device indicated that there was empty space extending from floor to ceiling, roughly 3 feet deep and running the entire length of the wall. What do you think Jake found when he started investigating that wall? Drop your theories in the comments below, because what he discovered would uncover evidence of crimes that had been hidden for over 30 years. Jake initially thought he might have found an old dumbwaiter shaft or a sealed-off closet that had been walled over during previous renovations. Old houses often had architectural features that had been covered or modified over the decades, and he was excited about the possibility of restoring an original element of the home's design. "I thought maybe we had found a hidden storage area or an old servant's staircase," Jake recalled. "I was actually excited about it. Emma and I love old houses, and we thought it would be cool to restore whatever we found back to its original purpose." But as Jake began carefully removing sections of drywall, he realized that what he was uncovering wasn't an original architectural feature. The wall had been deliberately constructed to conceal something, with multiple layers of different materials that suggested it had been built to hide whatever was behind it permanently. "The wall construction was bizarre," Jake observed. "It wasn't built like any other wall in the house. It had extra sound insulation, multiple layers of drywall, and even what looked like a vapor barrier. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure that whatever was behind this wall would never be found." Emma was at work teaching when Jake made his discovery, so he was alone in the house when he finally broke through the last layer of drywall and found himself staring into a hidden room that had been sealed for decades. I used my phone's flashlight to look inside, and the first thing I saw was a desk, Jake told investigators. It was an old wooden desk with papers scattered on top, like someone had just stepped away from their work. But the papers looked yellow and old, and there was dust covering everything. The hidden room was approximately 3 feet wide, 8 feet long, and extended from floor to ceiling. It had been carefully constructed with its own electrical outlet, ventilation system, and even carpeting that had been installed before the concealing wall was built. Someone had created a secret office, Jake realized as he examined the space with his flashlight. But why would anyone need to hide an office so carefully? And why had it been sealed up instead of just locked? Jake squeezed through the opening he had created and stepped into the hidden room for the first time. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life and provide investigators with evidence they had been searching for since 1994. The room contained a desk, filing cabinets, and shelves that were filled with what appeared to be a carefully organized collection of personal items. But as Jake's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he began to realize that these weren't just random possessions, they were trophies. There were jewelry boxes with women's rings and necklaces, photograph albums filled with pictures of people I didn't recognize, and folders containing what looked like newspaper clippings, Jake described to Detective Martinez. But there was something wrong with all of it. The photos looked like they had been taken without the subjects knowing, and the newspaper clippings were all about missing persons and unsolved murders. The most disturbing discovery was a collection of driver's licenses, student ID cards, and other personal identification documents that had been carefully preserved in plastic sleeves and organized in a filing system. Each sleeve contained multiple items that appeared to belong to different individuals, primarily young women between the ages of 18 and 35. I found at least 20 different driver's licenses from women across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, Jake continued, his voice breaking as he remembered the moment he realized what he had discovered. Some of the licenses dated back to the 1970s and 1980s. These weren't just random items, they were souvenirs that someone had kept as reminders of something terrible. Jake immediately backed out of the hidden room and called Emma at work. When she answered, he could barely form the words to explain what he had found. Jake was completely panicked when he called me, Emma recalled. He kept saying that we had to call the police immediately, that there was something horrible in our house. I thought maybe he had found asbestos or structural damage, but when he told me about the driver's licenses and photographs, I knew we were dealing with something much worse. Emma left work immediately and arrived home to find Jake sitting on their front porch, refusing to go back inside the house. Together, they called 911 and reported their discovery to the Millbrook Police Department. "We have found what appears to be evidence of serious crimes hidden in our house," Emma told the 911 dispatcher. "There's a secret room with what looks like trophies from victims. We need investigators here immediately." Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at the Carter house at 2:15 p.m., accompanied by a team of forensic specialists and crime scene investigators. Martinez, a 15-year veteran of the Pennsylvania State Police with extensive experience in cold case investigations, immediately recognized the significance of what the Carters had discovered. "The moment I looked into that hidden room, I knew we were dealing with a serial killer's trophy collection," Detective Martinez later testified. "The level of organization, the variety of personal items, and the careful preservation methods all indicated that someone had been collecting souvenirs from multiple victims over an extended period of time." The crime scene team spent 8 hours photographing and cataloging the contents of the hidden room. What they found would provide crucial evidence for reopening investigations into dozens of missing persons cases that had gone cold over the past 30 years. "We recovered over 200 individual items from the hidden room," Detective Martinez revealed during a press conference. These included personal identification documents, jewelry, photographs, clothing items, and personal effects that appeared to belong to at least 30 different individuals. Many of these items corresponded to missing persons cases from the 1970s, 1980s, and early 1990s. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a detailed journal that had been hidden in a locked desk drawer. The journal contained handwritten entries documenting what appeared to be the stalking, abduction, and murder of multiple victims over a 20-year period. The journal was like a serial killer's diary, Detective Martinez explained. It contained detailed descriptions of how the perpetrator selected victims, followed them, and ultimately abducted them. The entries were written in a clinical, detached style that showed no remorse or empathy for the victims. The journal entries were dated from 1973 to 1993, with the final entry written just weeks before the hidden room had been sealed. The handwriting analysis would later confirm that all entries had been written by the same person, and the detailed knowledge of the crimes described in the journal matched evidence from multiple unsolved cases. As investigators analyzed the contents of the hidden room, they began to piece together a timeline of crimes that had terrorized communities across the Northeast for 2 decades. The trophy collection represented victims from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Maryland, suggesting that the perpetrator had been a mobile predator who traveled extensively to avoid detection. We were looking at evidence of one of the most prolific serial killers in Pennsylvania history, Detective Martinez observed. This person had been operating for at least 20 years, claiming victims across multiple states, and had managed to avoid detection by law enforcement throughout their criminal career. But the most pressing question was the identity of the killer who had used 1247 Maple Street as his trophy room. Property records showed that the house had been owned by 3 different families since 1973, but investigators needed to determine which resident had been responsible for the crimes and what had happened to them. The investigation would reveal a story of deception, hidden identity, and a killer who had disappeared just as investigators were closing in on his trail. The hidden room in the Carter's house was just the beginning of a mystery that would expose crimes dating back 50 years and provide closure for families who had been searching for answers for decades. Jake and Emma Carter had bought their dream home, but they had also inherited the darkest chapter in their community's history. The secret in the walls would change their lives forever and force them to confront the reality that evil had been living just inches away from their daily lives. Like this video if you're as shocked by this discovery as I am. And let me know in the comments what you think happened to the serial killer who created this hidden trophy room. Don't forget to subscribe because in part 2, we're going to reveal the identity of the monster who lived at 1247 Maple Street and uncover the full scope of his crimes against innocent victims. The truth about the secret in the walls will leave you checking every corner of your own home. Welcome back to Shocking Stories. When we left off, Jake and Emma Carter had discovered a hidden room in their Pennsylvania home containing what appeared to be trophies from dozens of victims of a serial killer who had operated for over 20 years. What investigators uncovered when they began tracing the history of 1247 Maple Street would expose one of the most cunning and prolific predators in American criminal history. A man who had hidden in plain sight while terrorizing families across multiple states. The investigation into the identity of the serial killer who had used the Carter's house as his trophy room began with a comprehensive analysis of property records dating back to 1950. Detective Sarah Martinez and her team needed to identify every person who had lived at 1247 Maple Street and determine which resident had been responsible for creating the hidden chamber. We started with the assumption that whoever built the hidden room had lived in the house long enough to complete such an extensive construction project without arousing suspicion. Detective Martinez explained to the FBI task force that had been called in to assist with the investigation. The room had been carefully planned and professionally constructed, suggesting that the perpetrator had both the time and the resources to complete the project. Property records revealed that the house had been owned by 4 different families since its construction in 1950. The original owners, Robert and Helen Patterson, had lived there from 1950 to 1971 before selling to Thomas and Margaret Hoffman. The Hoffmans had owned the house from 1971 to 2009, when Thomas died and Margaret inherited the property. Margaret had lived there alone until her death in 2023, when the house was sold to the Carter family. The timeline immediately focused our attention on Thomas Hoffman, Detective Martinez revealed. He had owned the house during the period when the crimes were committed, and he had the time and opportunity to construct the hidden room. The journal entries found in the secret chamber dated from 1973 to 1993, which corresponded exactly to the early years of the Hoffmans' residency. But as investigators began researching Thomas Hoffman's background, they discovered that his identity was far more complex than public records suggested. The man who had lived at 1247 Maple Street for 38 years had been hiding secrets that went far beyond the trophy room in his wall. FBI forensic genealogist Dr. Lisa Chen was brought in to analyze DNA evidence recovered from the hidden room and compare it to samples from known missing persons cases. What she found would revolutionize the investigation and expose the true scope of the crimes committed by the house's former resident. The DNA evidence told us a remarkable story, Dr. Chen explained during a FBI briefing. We found genetic material from at least 15 different individuals in that hidden room, and when we ran those profiles through the National Missing Persons database, we got matches to cases spanning from 1974 to 1992. The DNA matches included victims from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Maryland, and Delaware, confirming that the killer had been operating across state lines for nearly 2 decades. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was that several of the victims had been reported missing from locations over 500 miles away from Millbrook. We were dealing with a highly mobile predator who traveled extensively to select and abduct victims, Dr. Chen continued. This wasn't someone who was killing opportunistically in his local area. This was a sophisticated criminal who was deliberately choosing victims from different jurisdictions to avoid detection. The breakthrough in identifying the killer came when investigators discovered that Thomas Hoffman wasn't his real name. Fingerprint analysis of items found in the hidden room revealed that the man who had lived at 1247 Maple Street was actually Jerry Kozlowski, a former truck driver who had been wanted by the FBI since 1994 for questioning in connection with several missing persons cases. Jerry Kozlowski had been on our radar since the early 1990s, explained FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, who had been investigating interstate serial crimes for over a decade. He was a long-haul truck driver whose routes coincided with multiple missing persons cases, but he had disappeared before we could question him. We now realized that he had been living under a false identity in Millbrook for over 20 years. The investigation revealed that Jerry Kozlowski had assumed the identity of Thomas Hoffman in 1971, after the real Thomas Hoffman had died in a car accident in Nevada. Kozlowski had stolen Hoffman's identification documents and social security number, then moved to Pennsylvania and established a completely new life under the false identity. Jerry was incredibly sophisticated in his identity theft, Agent Martinez observed. He had obtained Thomas Hoffman's birth certificate, social security card, and other documents, then used those to get a Pennsylvania driver's license, open bank accounts, and even get married. Margaret Hoffman had no idea that her husband of 38 years was actually a serial killer living under a stolen identity. The real Thomas Hoffman had been born in 1943 and died in 1971 at the age of 28, with no surviving family members who might have noticed that someone was using his identity. This had allowed Kozlowski to live as Thomas Hoffman for over 50 years without detection. But the most disturbing discovery was that Kozlowski had used his truck driving career to identify and stalk potential victims across multiple states. Analysis of his employment records revealed that he had worked for various trucking companies throughout the 1970s and 1980s, with routes that took him through every state where victims had been found. Jerry would identify potential victims during his truck routes, then return weeks or months later to stalk and abduct them, Agent Martinez explained. He had perfected a system that allowed him to select victims far from his home base, reducing the chances that investigators would connect the crimes to him. The hidden journal found in the Carter's house provided chilling details about Kozlowski's methods and motivations. The entries, written in his own hand, documented how he selected victims, planned their abductions, and disposed of their bodies after killing them. May 15, 1978, saw the perfect girl today in Harrisburg. Red hair, green eyes, about 22. Works at the diner on Route 15. Lives alone in the apartment above the restaurant. We'll be back through this route in 3 weeks. Perfect timing. June 8, 1978, returned to Harrisburg. Followed the redhead home from work. She takes the same route every night at 11:30 p.m. Street is dark, no witnesses. Tomorrow night will be perfect. June 9, 1978, successful acquisition. Subject struggled more than expected but no complications. Added her ring and driver's license to the collection. Margaret thinks I'm in Delaware making deliveries. The journal entries revealed that Kozlowski had killed at least 37 people over a 20-year period, far more than investigators had initially estimated based on the trophy collection. Many of his victims had been young women working in restaurants, gas stations, and other businesses along interstate highways, making them vulnerable to a predator who could strike and disappear before anyone realized they were missing. Jerry targeted women who worked alone, lived alone, and had limited social connections, FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Michael Torres explained during the investigation. He was looking for victims whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed, giving him time to return home and establish alibis. But Kozlowski's crimes weren't limited to murder. The journal revealed that he had also been involved in human trafficking, selling some of his victims to other criminals rather than killing them immediately. This explained why some of the personal items in the trophy room belonged to women who had never been reported missing. Some of Jerry's victims were never reported missing because they had no family or friends who would notice their absence, Dr. Torres continued. He specifically targeted vulnerable women, runaways, sex workers, addicts, who existed on the margins of society and whose disappearances wouldn't generate media attention or intensive police investigations. The investigation also revealed how Kozlowski had managed to avoid suspicion for so long. His marriage to Margaret Hoffman had provided him with the perfect cover identity as a stable, married man with no criminal background. Margaret's family and friends had accepted Thomas as a hard-working truck driver who was devoted to his wife. Margaret was completely innocent, Detective Martinez emphasized. She had no idea that her husband was a serial killer. To her, he was just a truck driver who was away for work frequently. She never suspected that his absences were opportunities for him to hunt and kill victims across multiple states. Margaret Hoffman had died in 2023, taking with her any knowledge she might have had about her husband's secret life. But investigators found evidence that Kozlowski had carefully compartmentalized his crimes, never bringing his violent activities into his home life with Margaret. Jerry was a master of deception, Dr. Torres observed. He was able to maintain two completely separate identities, the loving husband and the ruthless killer. This psychological compartmentalization allowed him to commit horrific crimes while appearing to be a normal, law-abiding citizen to everyone who knew him. The journal's final entry, dated December 15, 1993, provided crucial information about why Kozlowski had suddenly stopped killing and sealed the trophy room. FBI agents came to the trucking company asking questions about routes and missing women. Time to disappear. Sealed the collection room tonight. Margaret thinks I'm taking early retirement due to back problems. We'll stay close to home from now on. The hunting days are over. This entry explained why Kozlowski had stopped his killing spree in 1993 and why he had sealed the hidden room containing his trophy collection. He had realized that law enforcement was closing in on him and had decided to abandon his life as a serial killer to avoid detection. Jerry knew that his truck driving career had made him a suspect in multiple cases, Agent Martinez explained. Rather than risk capture, he simply stopped killing and focused on maintaining his false identity as Thomas Hoffman. For 30 years, he lived quietly in Millbrook while investigators searched for a killer who had essentially retired. But the investigation revealed that Kozlowski's story didn't end with his decision to stop killing. Property records and witness interviews suggested that Thomas Hoffman had died under suspicious circumstances in 2009, and that Margaret Hoffman might not have been aware of the true nature of her husband's death. The mystery of what had happened to Jerry Kozlowski after he sealed his trophy room would become the focus of the investigation's final phase, as investigators worked to determine whether the serial killer had died peacefully in his bed or whether justice had finally caught up with him through other means. As part 2 of our investigation concludes, the hidden room in the Carter's house had revealed not just evidence of decades-old crimes, but the complete identity and methods of one of America's most prolific serial killers. Jerry Kozlowski had used the perfect cover identity to commit at least 37 murders while hiding in plain sight as a devoted husband and hard-working truck driver. Don't miss part 3, where we'll reveal what really happened to Jerry Kozlowski, explore how his victims' families finally found closure after decades of searching, and examine how this case changed the way law enforcement investigates missing persons cases involving long-haul truckers. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because the conclusion of this story will show you how a hidden room exposed crimes that had been forgotten by everyone except the families who never stopped searching for answers. What do you think happened to Jerry Kozlowski after 1993? Let me know in the comments whether you think he died naturally or if someone finally made him pay for his crimes. And share this video to help spread awareness about the importance of never giving up on missing persons cases, no matter how old they become. Welcome back to the shocking conclusion of our investigation into the secret in the walls. When we left off, investigators had identified Jerry Kozlowski as the serial killer who had used the Carter's house to hide trophies from at least 37 murders committed over 2 decades. But what happened to Kozlowski after he sealed his trophy room in 1993 would provide the final, surprising chapter in a story of justice delayed but not denied. The search for Jerry Kozlowski's fate after 1993 began with a thorough examination of the life he had built as Thomas Hoffman. Investigators needed to determine whether the serial killer had died peacefully in his adopted identity or whether his past had finally caught up with him. Our initial assumption was that Jerry had successfully escaped justice by living quietly under his false identity until his natural death in 2009, explained FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez. But as we dug deeper into the circumstances surrounding Thomas Hoffman's death, we began to suspect that there was more to the story. The official cause of death for Thomas Hoffman had been listed as a heart attack, with no autopsy performed due to his age and apparent lack of suspicious circumstances. Margaret Hoffman had found her husband dead in his workshop behind their house on the morning of March 15, 2009, and had called paramedics who pronounced him dead at the scene. But when investigators re-examined the police report from that day, they found several details that seemed inconsistent with a natural death. The workshop where Thomas had been found was unusually clean and organized, with tools arranged in a way that suggested someone had spent time cleaning the space after his death. Margaret told the responding officers that her husband had been working on a woodworking project the night before he died, Detective Sarah Martinez recalled. But when we looked at the workshop 16 years later, there was no evidence of any recent woodworking activity. The tools were clean, there was no sawdust or wood shavings, and no partially completed projects. More troubling was the discovery that Thomas Hoffman had been scheduled to meet with someone on the night before his death. Margaret had told investigators that her husband had received a phone call around 8 p.m. on March 14 and had told her he needed to go to his workshop to meet with someone about old business. Margaret said Thomas seemed nervous about the meeting, which was unusual for him, Detective Martinez continued. He had told her not to disturb him and to go to bed early. When she woke up the next morning and found him dead in the workshop, she assumed he had been working late and suffered a heart attack. The investigation into Thomas Hoffman's death was reopened as a potential homicide when investigators discovered evidence that someone else had been in the workshop on the night he died. Forensic analysis of the workshop, conducted 16 years after the original incident, revealed traces of blood that hadn't been mentioned in the original police report. We found microscopic blood evidence in the workshop that was inconsistent with a natural death, explained forensic specialist Dr. Patricia Moore. The blood patterns suggested that Thomas had been injured before his death, and that someone had attempted to clean up the evidence afterward. DNA analysis of the blood evidence revealed something shocking. It belonged to Jerry Kozlowski, confirming that the man who had died as Thomas Hoffman was indeed the serial killer investigators had been seeking. But the blood evidence also revealed the presence of DNA from another individual, someone who had been in the workshop on the night of Kozlowski's death. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators decided to re-interview Margaret Hoffman's neighbors and family members about the events surrounding Thomas's death. What they discovered would provide a stunning conclusion to the Jerry Kozlowski case and reveal that justice had been served in a way that no one had expected. Margaret's nephew, Detective Robert Chen of the New Jersey State Police, had been investigating missing persons cases in his state when he came across evidence that connected several disappearances to a truck driver who matched Jerry Kozlowski's description. Detective Chen had been developing leads in the case throughout 2008 and early 2009, and had identified Thomas Hoffman as a person of interest. Bob Chen had been tracking his uncle Thomas for months before the meeting in March 2009, Agent Martinez revealed during a press conference. He had connected truck driver employment records, missing persons cases, and witness descriptions to identify Thomas Hoffman as potentially being the serial killer he was investigating. Bob went to that workshop with the intention of getting a confession from his uncle, Agent Martinez continued. He had DNA evidence, witness statements, and circumstantial evidence that would have been enough to arrest Thomas, but he wanted to give him the opportunity to confess and provide information about the victim's remains. The confrontation in the workshop had not gone as Detective Chen had planned. When presented with evidence of his crimes, Jerry Kozlowski had become violent and had attacked his nephew with a woodworking tool. In the struggle that followed, Detective Chen had been forced to defend himself, ultimately killing Kozlowski in what was clearly a case of self-defense. Bob Chen had no choice but to defend himself when Jerry Kozlowski attacked him, Agent Martinez explained. The forensic evidence from the workshop showed that Jerry had struck first, injuring Detective Chen before Chen was able to subdue him. Jerry Kozlowski died from injuries sustained during the struggle. But Detective Chen had found himself in an impossible situation. He had killed his aunt's husband while investigating him as a serial killer, but he had no way to prove Kozlowski's guilt without the evidence that would later be found in the hidden room. Chen had made the difficult decision to stage the scene to look like a natural death, protecting his Aunt Margaret from learning the truth about her husband's crimes. Bob Chen made a choice to protect his aunt from learning that she had been married to a serial killer for 38 years, Agent Martinez observed. He cleaned up the evidence of the struggle, arranged Jerry's body to suggest a heart attack, and allowed Margaret to believe that her husband had died peacefully. It was an act of mercy that allowed Margaret to live her final years without the trauma of knowing the truth. Detective Chen had carried the secret of what had happened in that workshop for 16 years, until the discovery of the hidden room in the Carter's house finally provided the evidence he needed to prove that Jerry Kozlowski had been a serial killer. When confronted with the new evidence, Chen confessed to what had happened on the night of March 15, 2009. "I went to that workshop to arrest a serial killer," Detective Chen told investigators during his confession. "When I presented him with the evidence of his crimes, he became violent and tried to kill me. I defended myself, and Jerry Kozlowski died in the struggle. I made the decision to stage it as a natural death to protect my aunt from learning the truth about the monster she had been married to." The revelation that Jerry Kozlowski had been killed by a police detective investigating his crimes provided a form of justice that the legal system had been unable to deliver. While Chen faced potential charges for his actions, prosecutors ultimately decided not to pursue the case due to the circumstances and the public interest in protecting the families of Kozlowski's victims. Detective Chen prevented Jerry Kozlowski from ever facing trial for his crimes, but he also prevented him from claiming any more victims, explained District Attorney Patricia Wilson. Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the fact that Chen was acting in his capacity as a law enforcement officer investigating serious crimes, we have decided not to pursue charges. The discovery of Jerry Kozlowski's identity and the circumstances of his death provided crucial closure for the families of his victims. The trophy room in the Carter's house contained enough evidence to connect Kozlowski to 37 different murders, allowing investigators to close cold cases that had been unsolved for decades. For the first time in 30 to 50 years, families finally had answers about what had happened to their missing loved ones, explained Victim Services Coordinator Lisa Chen, who worked with the families throughout the investigation. Many of these families had never given up hope that their children, sisters, or mothers would be found alive. Learning the truth was devastating, but it also provided the closure they had been seeking for decades. The evidence from the hidden room allowed investigators to locate several burial sites where Jerry Kozlowski had disposed of his victims' remains. Over the course of 2 years, the remains of 23 victims were recovered and returned to their families for proper burial. Jerry had kept detailed records of where he had buried his victims, Agent Martinez revealed. His journal contained maps and descriptions that allowed us to locate graves in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Maryland. Families who had been searching for answers for 50 years were finally able to lay their loved ones to rest. The case also led to significant changes in how law enforcement investigates missing persons cases involving long-haul truckers. The FBI established a new database specifically designed to track patterns of disappearances along interstate trucking routes, helping to identify potential serial killers who use the highway system to select and transport victims. The Jerry Kozlowski case taught us that long-haul truckers have unique opportunities to commit crimes across multiple jurisdictions while avoiding detection, Agent Martinez explained. We now have better systems in place to identify patterns and connect cases that might be related to mobile predators. Jake and Emma Carter, whose renovation project had uncovered the hidden room, struggled with the knowledge that their dream home had been the secret lair of a serial killer for over 20 years. They ultimately decided to sell the house and donate the proceeds to organizations that support the families of missing persons. We couldn't continue living in a house where so much evil had been planned and celebrated, Emma Carter explained during a later interview. Every time we looked at that wall where the hidden room had been, we thought about the victims whose personal belongings had been kept there as trophies. It wasn't a home anymore, it was a crime scene. The house at 1247 Maple Street was eventually purchased by the Millbrook Historical Society, which converted it into a memorial and education center dedicated to the victims of Jerry Kozlowski's crimes. The hidden room has been preserved as part of a museum exhibit that teaches visitors about the warning signs of predatory behavior and the importance of supporting missing persons investigations. We wanted to ensure that Jerry Kozlowski's victims are remembered not as trophies in a killer's collection, but as real people who had lives, families, and dreams, explained Historical Society President Robert Kim. This memorial gives their families a place to honor their memory and helps educate the public about these crimes. The memorial includes photographs and biographical information about each of Kozlowski's identified victims, along with information about missing persons cases that remain unsolved. Visitors can learn about the investigation that exposed Kozlowski's crimes and the importance of never giving up hope when someone goes missing. Margaret Hoffman passed away in 2023 without ever learning the truth about her husband's secret life as a serial killer. Detective Chen's decision to protect his aunt from that knowledge allowed her to live her final years with happy memories of her marriage, rather than the trauma of discovering she had been married to a monster. Margaret died believing that she had been married to a good man who loved her, Detective Chen reflected during a recent interview. That was the greatest gift I could give her after learning the truth about Jerry Kozlowski. She deserved to keep her happy memories rather than be destroyed by the knowledge of what he really was. As our investigation into the secret in the walls concludes, the story of Jerry Kozlowski serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, and that justice can take many forms. While Kozlowski never faced trial for his crimes, he also never claimed another victim after Detective Chen confronted him in that workshop in 2009. The hidden room that Jake and Emma Carter discovered in their wall provided closure for dozens of families who had been searching for answers for decades. It proved that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually find a way to surface and provide justice for those who have been forgotten. The secret in the walls wasn't just about Jerry Kozlowski's crimes, Agent Martinez reflected. It was about the resilience of families who never gave up searching for their loved ones, the dedication of investigators who never stopped working cold cases, and the power of truth to eventually overcome even the most carefully constructed lies. If this incredible story of hidden evil and ultimate justice has moved you as much as it has moved us, please like this video and share it to help raise awareness about missing persons cases and the importance of supporting families who are searching for answers. Subscribe to Shocking Stories for more investigations that prove that no matter how well criminals think they've hidden their crimes, the truth will always find a way to surface. Remember that behind every missing person is a family that deserves answers, and that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. The secret in the walls at 1247 Maple Street may have been hidden for 30 years, but it ultimately provided justice for 37 victims and closure for the families who never stopped believing that the truth would eventually be revealed. Jerry Kozlowski thought he had committed the perfect crimes, but he underestimated the power of time, determination, and a young couple's renovation project to expose the evil he had tried so hard to hide.